So hi, everybody. My name is Julie Loans, the director and curator of the UT Galleries and Collection at the School of Art. Today we're here with Jorge Lucero, who is newly the Associate Dean of Research in the College of Fine and Applied Arts at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And Jorge has brought his study collection, which is all around us, to the Downtown Gallery, which will be on display until December 7th. So we're just here to chat a little bit and talk about the collection, and also about Jorge as an artist and kind of his path to where he is today. So I guess.
And what gives me the gall to call something like this an artwork?
Yeah, maybe we can start with that.
Yeah.
Since we're in the collection, and just talk a little bit about how you came to developing the collection, what it's about for you, how you might want people to interact with it.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me start with the joke I was making just now. I mean, I am nervous about calling it an artwork because I understand that it teeters on, it gets very close to something that many people have in their own homes. So there's not really, the thing that makes it special is that it's mine and that it's big, and now maybe that it's in this gallery, right? But other than that, you know, I know a lot of people who have their own version of something like this, right? And even I was speaking to Mike Berry, the gallery manager, about this morning. I was talking about some collections I had when I was 16, and those had the same kind of significance that this has for me. So they end up becoming like an extension. They are an extension of memory, a sort of externalized version or a monument to like a lived experience. And then they're also, of course, like a research component, or a research buddy, you know, something that you take along with you and that you could always kind of go back to and get lost in and learn new things from and revive things that maybe you've forgotten and stuff. But the way that to answer the other part of your question, the way that it came about was, it came about very early. So I would actually date it back to those teen years when I was actively collecting CDs and posters and trinkets and toys. I think on some level it's a way of being an art collector that, you know, without a budget, like without being able to afford things that have objective value or that they have market value, right? But they're things that are precious to an individual. Mm-hmm. So I've always done that. When I was younger, my bedroom was filled with stuff. It maybe looked a lot like this, but like the teen version of it. And when I became a high school teacher, I started to move that into my classroom. So it became more participatory. So it wasn't just this individual space that I would retreat into that didn't have other people touching it. As many art teachers do, I think, I had a classroom that had a lot of stuff in it. Mm-hmm. And some of that stuff was precious. I should say, none of that stuff was precious, but it was all sort of treated with a certain kind of reverence, whether it was for what it could be used for or what it was, you know, whether it was things that students had made or things that we had collected to be inspired by or whatever. And that was everything from books to objects to, again, toys and images and, what have you. So what happened was, and believe me, I'm telling you the short version of this story. What happened was 13 years ago when I started teaching at the university, I was given an office in a hallway that is predominantly filled with faculty offices. And at any given moment when faculty are either in their offices with their doors closed or not in their offices, you can walk down that hallway and not necessarily see what's happening in the school. And it's less like that now because they've actually converted some classrooms and put glass windows on them so you could sort of see, glass walls so you could sort of see what's happening inside of them.
Okay.
So it's
yeah.
less like that now. But when I first got the job, it was just more like a wall of doors that were closed, unless of course there was a faculty member in their office who had their door open. But even then, it'd be weird to like poke your head in if you didn't have an appointment with a faculty member. So I decided that what I wanted to do, I was kind of missing the element of the high school classroom that allowed for people to wander into the room all the time. Part of it was, how high school students have a hard time deciphering where they should and shouldn't go. And so, but the other part of it was just always trying to create a welcoming space where the kids could come in during their lunch, while I was teaching other classes, during my planned periods, after, before school, whenever. So there was always a steady stream of young people in the classroom, and I wanted to see if there was a way that I could do that with my institutional space at the university. So I decided that I was going to I opened the space on Tuesdays with a project called Split My Lunch, where I would make a double lunch, and then whoever showed up at 12:20 that day, I would split my lunch with them. And this is a way that I got to meet a bunch of people who were not my students necessarily. They were not, they undergraduates, graduate students, staff in the building, faculty, other faculty members. It really made my office porous. It made it really something that people could walk into and not necessarily have to be there to conduct business with me. So then at that point, I reconfigured the office in a way that I could put my desk in the most inconspicuous part of the office so that all of the collection would be foregrounded, and then the business part of what I was doing would be sort of hidden in the office. And then I started opening it regularly once a week so that I made a little sandwich board that announced what was happening, and then people could come into the office and just peruse, and there was a tea kettle so they could have tea and everything. There was nothing that was off, everything was hands-on. You could touch anything that was in the study collection, and people would come in, and sometimes I would talk to them, not because they wanted to talk to me, so I would talk to them. Sometimes people would just come in and look, and then sometimes people would come in and actually study, And the only thing is that I made it non-circulating, so there was no borrowing from the collection, just like there isn't from this either. Like people can come here and look at stuff here, but they can't take anything with them. Yeah.
So there's no organizational component as to how things are put on the shelves or displayed. It's just a random decision in the moment when you're installing it, or in the moment when you're adding a new book to the collection.
I think random would be too far. Like I wouldn't say it's random. I would say that it's not organized in a conventional sense, but it's on purpose though. And what I mean by that is, I have been encouraged by friends and family to perhaps think about organizing it either by theme or alphabetically, especially if I'm looking for something. If sometimes I've had a student that I'm advising in the space and I want to show them something, and then I don't know where the book is necessarily right away, so I have to kind of peruse and really try to find it. So for people who are more efficient than me, it would be nice if it was more organized. But I have a reason for why I don't do that. And part of it is because I alluded to it in my introductory comments about it, is because I like finding things that I wasn't intending to find. And so sometimes when I'm looking for something specific, I stumble across something that I haven't seen in a while, or something that I forgot was in the collection, or something that's related to the thing that I'm looking for, but I didn't make those connections immediately. So this kind of, it's set up in a way to purposefully find new things within it constantly. And so I usually give myself time. Now when I need to show a student something, if I can't find it immediately and I don't want to hold the meeting up, I'll usually say, well, sometimes they start to help me to find it. They'll ask me, what's the spine look like? And I'll tell them, and we'll both be looking, and they'll find other things themselves. But sometimes I'll just say, I'll find it and I'll send it to you, or I'll put it in your mailbox or something. So sometimes there's that delayed gratification with it, right? But the objective with it is, I mean, it is organized in that way. It's just not organized in a conventional sense.
And so potentially if a visitor is coming to the UT Downtown Gallery, the thought is that they could really touch anything, pull anything out, put it on the table, rearrange things, reshelve it in a totally opposite place, and hopefully stumble on something that maybe they didn't expect that they would want to know, but they're excited that they found that might lead them to something else in the future.
Yes, and I think what's a little bit different from this as an exhibition, because I don't really show it as an artwork, right? This is a thing that I live with, but this is the second time that I've shown it as an artwork. And what I really love about this version of it, this iteration of it, is all of the surfaces in the room that are meant to be populated by whoever's interacting with the study collection. So every table in this room has stuff on it, but nothing is, nothing is obligated to have to be there, right? If somebody wants to take something, pick it up and put it back on the shelf, or pick out something else and put it down, or make their own arrangement, they can do that. I mean, yes, all of these objects are mine. I've selected them, so they have a certain kind of curated spirit to them, but still people who come in here are able to find enough things that are reflective of themselves that they would be able to create their own version of a study collection at an individual table. So you can choose a table, you can clear it off by taking everything that's on there and stacking it somewhere else in here, or putting it back on the shelf. And then you can make your own installation on that table, which would then, I would argue that in some ways it's like a self-portrait, because you're sort of showing components of things that you're interested to. That's one way to think about it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So going back to that, you've curated the selections here. Can you talk a little bit about what subject matters might be in the collection, or what somebody might do with a box or something that is more atypical, like something folded that has that you have to kind of unwrap
components?
Yeah.
So that's one of the, if I had to say what's in the collection, one of the first things that I would say is throughout the collection are things that take up the notion of what a book could be. So you just pointed at this thing right here, and I mean, there's two of them right there actually that are actually, they're books, but they're modular. So the pages are not, you can reshuffle the pages, or you can spread it out, so they're not bound like a conventional book. This box that's on the table here it has various components inside of it. So I really love, well, I shouldn't say that I'm interested in having things that challenge the notion of what a book could be. And we haven't spoken about this actually, but the reason that I have those examples is because I am an artist, but I work at an institution and I serve on many dissertation committees. And frequently when I'm having a conversation with a student about their dissertation project, it always starts with the traditions and conventions of how a dissertation is put together. But that doesn't fit the outcomes of what every student is needing to put into the world, especially students who are working, are knowledge creating through the arts in some way or another. So I like to offer them alternatives to the conventional sequenced book so that they can kind of rethink the way that they would present their generalizable knowledge that they've arrived through their dissertation project into the world. And so there's a lot of things here. For example, Linda Berry's syllabus book, which is a book that showcases a bunch of syllabi that are in the form of graphic novels or comics. Nick Suzanis's his own dissertation from when he was at Teachers College, which is completely a graphic novel. we didn't bring them for this version of the installation, but there's a record by an LP, a vinyl by A.D. Carson, who was a graduate student at Clemson, I believe, and his whole dissertation is a rap album. And so that's a part of the collection too. And those are only 3 examples, but there's so many different things in the collection that take up the notion of what a book can be, or whether or not there's a clean definition of what a book should be.
So that leads me to how you think about studio arts or studio practice, as well as the other things that a studio artist might do. So, for instance, in your case, art education. So you have these seemingly 2 disparate things that you do, but you've merged them into one. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about that? Okay.
Well, I've been in the academy in one way or another for 25 years, obviously, and that's from after I graduated with my undergraduate degree. But before that, I was a student in the academy, and even before that, I was just somebody who was interested in the arts. And so my career in the arts spans more than 3 decades, and I've just been very attentive to the way that it happens in the world, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that I know everything, but one of the things that I've noticed is that most of the time, practitioners, artists, now we can say visual artists, but it doesn't have to be exclusively that. I've seen this in dancers and poets. I've seen it in interdisciplinary artists. I've seen it in chefs. I've seen it in people who fix cars. There is a kind of primary urgency to test the pliability of the material world. And what I mean by that is a kind of, it may actually be too simple, but the way that I see it is what they're trying to do, what we're trying to do, is trying to figure out what the points of resistance are of the material that we're working with, or what the potentiality of that material is, right? So you sort of push it, you bend it, you heat it up, you tear it, whatever manipulation you have to do to it, even you think it differently. Because when I say material, I guess it sounds like I'm talking specifically about something that you can touch with your hands, but I'm talking about, there's people who work with digital languages, and there's people who work with language, right? Or with ideas. So all of that's, for me, fits within the thing that I'm talking about. So most of the time, what we as creative people are trying to do is trying to figure out how far what's the edge of those materials, and then once we figure out what that edge is, what the potentiality is of finding that edge. So to answer your question, for me, all of the things that I participate in that have a kind of materiality to them become curious for my testing of their pliability. Like, I become very interested in what they can do or what they won't do. And that includes having a collection. It includes teaching, which is, pedagogy. I see it as a material practice. That includes schooling, and I separate schooling from teaching because, sometimes schooling is the actual institutional behemoth. I don't know how else to describe it, but the sort of machine of the institution, which is something sometimes, curiously enough, wholly separate from actually teaching and learning, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think about those things as different things, but they all have their materiality to them. So like, what does it mean what does it mean to get bored or frustrated in a meeting, for example, right? And what does it, more specifically, what does it mean materially? So like, what is the edge of that sensation? This isn't me trying to say, like, let's have wackier meetings, or let's have meetings that involve, more stretching or what. That's not what because I've seen that kind of thing happen before, so that people don't want to have conventional meetings anymore because they're tired of that. But I personally think, like, I mean, I would go the other direction. I would say, like, what is the conventionalness or the tradition or the systematizing of a meeting and the way that they're done in that way? Like, what's so interesting? What can be so interesting about those things, right? So anyway, I just gave you sort of a gamut of experience that as an artist I'm interested in, simply because I don't see them different than pushing paint around on a canvas. Yeah.
And so, and I'm taking from things I've heard over the past couple of days since you've been here, since last Tuesday. You think about being conceptual artists as the same or similar to teaching as an art educator, that they can basically fold together into each other?
Yeah, well, for me, the overlap comes from the specific types of materiality that conceptual art reveals that map over what teachers do. So for example, I'm not saying this is everything that conceptual art is about, but a lot of conceptual art deals with time, or in different ways. It either picks up durationality as an element or as a material, or it deals with ephemerality, like the way that something maybe dissipates or disappears. Also, relationships is a big part of what happens in conceptual art. Dematerialization, I guess that would be a part of time also, and de-skilling is a huge thing that happens, that comes up in a lot of conceptual art. So and by that I just mean like that you don't have to be a specialist in something, or that you don't have to be a virtuoso in something in order to be able to participate in it. And all of those elements map over, and those are just three, there's more, but those three map over the kinds of things that happen in teaching. So teaching for the way that I'm proposing it, or the way that I've been trying to propose it, and the way that I live it in my life, is a durational practice that is highly ephemeral, mostly invisible, hard to document, and it takes a certain kind of devotion to be a part of it. Plus, it's exceptionally unspectacular. Like, it's not, there's a lot of things that happen in teaching that are too everyday to point out as art, or they're kind of boring, or they're arduous, or whatever, right? So anything from like filling out paperwork to like, attendance, classroom management, whatever, right? So for me, all of that stuff it resonates with some of the things that happen in conceptual art, and that resonance creates a kind of discourse between the two things that allows for them to be more purposefully liberated. So like, I can be a freer teacher if I can understand it through some of the conceptual art permissions that I've gotten. And in fact, through my teaching practice, or through my participation in school culture, I should say, I have more ready permissions for my conceptual art practice. Again, I'm talking about them as if they're separate, but they're the same thing. And the same thing goes for all the other things that I described about them. The relationship aspect is a huge part, and the indeterminate aspect of that. The part where, like, as a teacher, for example, you might have. I mean, you and I, for example, met this week in person, and all of the points of contact are in some ways like the planting of various seeds that are going to sprout in different ways. And there's a kind of, it implores us to be patient with the process, and also to be ready to not have it come to fruition at all. And most of those things go against some of the sort of capitalist imperatives of what it means to be an educator in this day and age. And so but at the same time, if I know teachers are the most comfortable with the paradigm of, I do something now and it's not going to have a ripple until 35 years from now. Like, they're really good at that.
I was going to pick up on the invisibility, and you had talked a little bit about that, and that teachers are like the most free, or the most important thing that's happening right now in this day and age, and that you can't really quantify what they do, because it might be that their students won't know and might not understand that what they learned in their art class is kind of affecting them or has ramifications in their future in 20, 30 years. But the teacher will never know.
Nobody might know. I mean, I'm sure it's happening right now.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure that our ability to be able to come here and have this conversation in this way is irrevocably touched by our prior instructors, teachers, and independent even of the teachers, just the educational encounters and moments that we had. Because sometimes they had to do with teachers, sometimes they had to do with classmates, sometimes they had to do with the way the sun was setting on that field trip when you were riding the bus to that place or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of factors that come into our quote unquote education. And there's a lot of untraceable effect. Like there's a lot of stuff that we're living that it would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible. It is maybe virtually impossible for you to be able to draw the lineage of it and say, that's exactly where it came from.
Yeah.
But still, it's undeniable that had it not been for it happening, you wouldn't be the person that you are today. I wouldn't be the person that I am today, right? So it's a thing you can't live without, but it's also a thing that at a certain point you lose the beginning of it, so you don't know really where it came from. And the reason I'm interested in that as an art form more than anything is because in the late 60s, when artists were making conceptual art and minimalist art and ephemeral art, the art critic Lucy Lepard and John Chandler wrote this essay called The Dematerialization of the Art Object. And in that essay at the very end, they said something to the effect of, we still do not know how much less nothing can be, which sounds like a little bit of a riddle, right? But what they were pointing out was the fact that artists had consistently been trying to reach the limits and the edges of their practices, but they weren't reaching that edge. So we still didn't know how much less nothing could be. And the reason that I think the reason we can't know that or won't know that is because we're too dependent on documentation. Like at the very least, even if there's an object that you can't see, that you can't touch, that nobody can access, like we have to tell the story of that piece, and that story is enough of a documentation to give it some life. So it sort of inhibits it from reaching that edge of less nothing that Lepard and Chandler were talking about. But I think teaching comes very close, because there's a lot of things that happen in teaching that if we think of them as our conceptual art practice, they go completely unseen. They will literally evaporate into the ether, or they will dissolve into the lived experience of so many individuals. And people won't be able to trace them.
Yeah, there's no way to place data onto those.
There's no
pieces.
Way. Yeah, but it's an undeniable ripple though. It does exist because people have said it. I've had a handful of students who had the wherewithal and the concreteness in their brain to be able to come back to me and say, remember that thing, or remember that year, or whatever. And that's great. But I know that those are just the students who were able to cut it off, articulate it, and bring it to me to say, look at what grew. Yeah. I know that there's an entanglement of that kind of fruit that I will never see. And in fact, I may not even be wholly responsible for it, because the way that teaching works is I give you a little piece, you grab the pieces from everything that came before, and you take them with everything that comes next, and you sort of cobble this thing together that becomes your education. Yeah. And you can't necessarily trace it back to a singular person anyway.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely, through your lineage, you talked about like the teachers that affected you along the way and stayed with you. Yeah. As I'm going to share, as a poor student in K through 12. that there were definitely teachers that let you explore in a way that was divergent from what was potentially mandated
Yes.
in the class, and that affected you to be able to get to where you are today.
Yeah. I didn't have a individual, what would be called an individual education plan, which is one of the ways that we now help to mediate whether or not a student is getting the proper diagnosis of what they need for, to achieve, like to meet whatever kinds of goals the teacher is wanting them to meet. I didn't have that, like a piece of paper that said, he's, hyperactive, or, he's dyslexic or whatever. I didn't have any document like that. But I did have teachers that were sensitive enough to know that even though there wasn't a concrete document that stated what I needed per the law, that I still needed an individual education plan, as every learner does, right? Like, and that this is another thing that's so magnificent about those of us who teach, is that we've somehow managed to develop the elasticity to be able to fulfill those individual education needs of classes of sometimes 30, 35 students, and in art classes sometimes more, because those classes sometimes get filled to the brim, if not over the brim, right?
Yeah.
So this is just an incredible set of skills that get executed on a daily basis in millions of spaces all around the world, and they're literally life-changing, while at the same time almost completely ignored.
Yeah, unseen.
Unseen, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying about education, our teachers. I'm going to loop back around, I think, to the collection. So when somebody comes in here, you wouldn't give them a prompt per se.
No. And I'm actually giving you all a special dispensation here at the UTK Downtown Gallery to do things here.
Yeah.
Because if you go and you read about this on my website, you'll notice that there are special directives about not doing anything in the space, like other than just being in the space and being with the things in the space, right? I think I do that mostly because I'm trying to get to the edge of what this could be, right? And so I feel like making it something, like having poetry readings or having a little concert in here or whatever, like that turns it into something else. Like it stops being the study collection and it just starts being like an event at the study collection, right? So,
right.
To answer your question, there's no directives on how to behave in this space, other than, obviously, I guess one of the directives is to be, this isn't written anywhere, I'm just going to say it on TV, to just be mindful of the objects and to take care of them, right? Like because I consider myself a steward of the collection in a way, and I'm careful with the things in the collection, mainly because I want I'm sure these are the kinds of things librarians say about their holdings most of the time, and museum and gallery curators and museum people, is you want to take care of those things because you want as many people to be able to benefit from them as possible, right? And so obviously if something happens to stuff, then you could find yourself in a murky situation, right? But other than that, no, there's no directives on how to engage with stuff. I think as long as the gallery's open, people could come in and view things, read, take photographs from the things in here, make arrangements of things that they want to see together. I think, there's plenty of things in here that are not books, and I'm sure those things can be used to make sculptural arrangements in here, I suppose. And even the books themselves, as long as the books are not being destroyed.
Yes. So we are now also stewards here and in kind of caretaking the collection. And Mike Berry, the Downtown Gallery manager, will certainly do that, as will I. But we definitely invite visitors and even small convenings of folks. If you want to do meetings, bring snacks, we have tea here. Definitely consider this a place to come and stay and visit for a long period of time, or maybe even 5 or 10 minutes. So I'm gonna, if there's any last thoughts that we haven't covered.
No, I mean, I'm glad. I want to say thank you for the invitation to bring this down to Knoxville from Urbana, Illinois. There's an element of it that is nerve-wracking because I'm going to leave soon without all of this stuff. But that sensation is coupled with the thrill of being able to see what it is and will become without me, right? So for that, I draw parallels maybe to what it's like to feel when your kids start growing up and start leaving, the house. You feel very close. You don't want, them to leave. They have to kind of leave, but then you see sort of all the glorious things they become on the other side of being so dependent on you, and that is a really great feeling. And so I'm excited to see how the study collection lives here in Knoxville for the time that it's here. And I look forward to seeing pictures and reports. And I would say that if anybody takes pictures of what they do while they're in here or make documentation, that they can send it to me or they can send it to you. And, we can figure out a way how to share it with each other.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and for all the effort to bring the work down here. We've had such a great week hanging out with you and discussing the work and being part of, I should say, the Tennessee Art Educators Association conference this past weekend, where Jorge was a keynote speaker and did some workshops. We've already had high school classes in here organizing some of or disorganizing or rearranging the books and objects. So it's already been a very active space. So I hope you'll join us.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.